Death. It's the one experience every human being will eventually face. From the moment we're born, it's the only certainty waiting for us. Yet despite thousands of years of philosophy, religion, medicine, and science, one question continues to haunt humanity. What actually happens in the moments before we die? Does everything simply fade into darkness? Does consciousness disappear instantly? Or does the brain experience something extraordinary during its final moments? For centuries, stories from survivors have fascinated doctors and researchers alike. People who were declared clinically dead, only to return minutes later, have described remarkable experiences. Some speak of moving through a tunnel filled with brilliant light. Others describe an overwhelming sense of peace unlike anything they've ever felt. Some say they watched doctors trying desperately to save their lives from somewhere above their own bodies. And then there are those who remember absolutely nothing. So who's right? Is there a scientific explanation for these experiences? Or have we only begun to understand one of the greatest mysteries of the human mind? Tonight, we'll explore what modern science actually knows, what people have reported, and the questions that remain unanswered. Because the truth may be far stranger than fiction. Imagine you're walking through your day. You're talking with friends, checking your phone, driving to work, planning tomorrow. You have no idea that in just a few moments, everything is about to change. Suddenly, your heart stops. Without warning, blood stops circulating through your body. Within seconds, oxygen can no longer reach your brain. Most people think this is the exact moment death occurs. But medically, it's much more complicated. Death is not a single event. It's a process. A series of biological changes that unfold over time. Doctors separate this process into different stages. One of the first is called cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest happens when the heart suddenly stops pumping blood effectively. Without circulation, organs begin losing the oxygen they need to function. Among all of them, the brain is the most vulnerable. Although it weighs only about 3 pounds, the human brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's oxygen. It is one of the most energy-demanding organs we have. The moment oxygen supply is interrupted, the brain immediately begins responding. Within seconds, many people lose consciousness. But exactly what happens inside the brain during those final moments is still being investigated. For decades, scientists assumed that once the heart stopped, the brain quickly became inactive. It seemed logical. No blood, no oxygen, no brain function. Case closed. But over the last several years, research has complicated that picture. Scientists studying both animals and humans have observed brief bursts of organized brain activity shortly after the heart stops under certain conditions. These findings don't prove that consciousness continues after death. Nor do they demonstrate that people are aware during this period. Instead, they suggest the brain may undergo a final wave of activity as it responds to the sudden loss of oxygen. Exactly what that activity means remains uncertain. Some researchers compare it to the final surge of a city experiencing a massive power outage. Lights flicker. Systems activate unexpectedly. Then, everything gradually goes silent. Others believe these bursts could represent the brain attempting one last effort to maintain normal function. At this point, science doesn't have a definitive answer. And that's what makes this mystery so fascinating. Our understanding of the brain has advanced dramatically over the past century. We've mapped regions responsible for language, emotion, memory, and movement. We can perform brain surgery while patients are awake. We can even detect thoughts using sophisticated imaging technologies. Yet consciousness itself remains one of science's greatest unsolved mysteries. What creates the feeling of being you? How does awareness emerge from billions of neurons communicating through tiny electrical signals? And perhaps the biggest question of all: what happens to that awareness when the brain begins shutting down? These aren't just philosophical questions anymore. They're scientific ones. Around the world, hospitals and universities are studying patients who survive cardiac arrest. Not to prove supernatural claims, but to better understand the biology of dying. What they've discovered is both fascinating and humbling. Some survivors report no memories whatsoever. It's as if time simply disappeared. One moment they were alive. The next, they woke up in a hospital bed surrounded by doctors. Others describe vivid dreams that felt more real than ordinary life. And then there are the accounts that continue to puzzle researchers. Stories of brilliant light, feelings of peace, life reviews, encounters with familiar faces. These experiences are commonly known as near-death experiences, or NDEs. They've been reported across different countries, different cultures, and different belief systems. But do they reveal something beyond current science? Or are they produced by a brain under extreme stress? That's where our investigation truly begins. Because before we can understand these extraordinary experiences, we first need to understand the incredible machine responsible for creating every memory, every emotion, every dream, and every moment of consciousness. The human brain. And what happens to it when the lights begin to go out? The human brain is often described as the most complex object in the known universe. Inside your skull are nearly 86 billion neurons. Each one is constantly sending electrical and chemical signals to thousands of others. Every memory you've ever made, every face you've ever recognized, every dream, every fear, every emotion, exists because of this astonishing network. Even while you're asleep, your brain never truly rests. It is constantly processing information, regulating breathing, controlling your heartbeat, storing memories, and predicting what will happen next. So what happens when its oxygen supply suddenly disappears? The answer isn't as simple as scientists once believed. When the heart stops beating, blood flow to the brain drops almost immediately. Without oxygen, brain cells can no longer produce enough energy to function normally. Within seconds, communication between neurons begins to fail. Vision often fades first. Some survivors describe their surroundings becoming darker, almost as if the world were slowly dimming. Others remember hearing distant voices before everything disappeared. Doctors believe this happens because different parts of the brain begin shutting down at different rates. The regions responsible for higher thinking lose function first. More basic survival systems continue working for a little longer. But here's where the mystery begins. Over the past 2 decades, researchers studying cardiac arrest have noticed something unexpected. In a small number of cases, brain monitoring equipment detected brief bursts of organized electrical activity after the heart had already stopped. These weren't random signals. Some patterns resembled the brain activity normally associated with attention, memory, or conscious processing. The findings surprised scientists around the world. Could the brain remain active for a short time after circulation stops? Could consciousness linger briefly? Or were these simply the final electrical discharges of a dying organ? Researchers remain cautious. These observations do not prove that people are consciously aware after cardiac arrest. The signals are difficult to interpret, and they don't occur in every case. But they challenge the long-held belief that the brain becomes instantly silent. One theory suggests that as oxygen levels fall, the brain releases a flood of chemicals in a desperate attempt to protect itself. Another proposes that dying neurons fire together in one final wave of activity before shutting down. Imagine a city during a massive blackout. As power begins to fail, some lights flicker one last time. Traffic signals flash. Emergency systems activate. Then, the city gradually falls silent. Some neuroscientists believe something similar may happen inside the brain. A final burst of activity. Before darkness. Whether that activity produces conscious experiences is still unknown. This uncertainty is exactly why scientists continue investigating. Every new discovery raises even more questions. If consciousness depends entirely on normal brain function, why do some survivors describe vivid experiences during periods when brain activity appears severely disrupted? Could memory distort events after recovery? Could dreams be compressed into what feels like only a few seconds? Or is something else happening that science has yet to explain? One challenge is that consciousness itself has no universally accepted definition. We can measure heartbeats. We can record brain waves. We can scan blood flow through different regions of the brain. But awareness, the feeling of being alive, cannot be directly measured. Instead, scientists must rely on indirect evidence. Brain activity, behavior, and just a few decades ago, many of these patients would never have been revived. Today, advanced CPR techniques, defibrillators, and intensive care medicine save countless lives every year. That also means researchers now have more opportunities to interview survivors. These interviews reveal something remarkable. Although every story is unique, certain themes appear again and again. People from different cultures, different religions, and different countries often describe surprisingly similar experiences. A bright light, an overwhelming sense of peace, the feeling of leaving the body, meeting familiar people, or reliving important moments from their lives. But why do these similarities exist? Are they clues to something universal? Or are they simply the result of how every human brain responds under extreme conditions? The search for that answer has taken scientists into one of the most fascinating areas of medical research. Because the stories people tell after returning from the edge of death are unlike anything most of us have ever experienced. And some of those stories are difficult to forget. In the next chapter, we'll explore the extraordinary world of near-death experiences, the common patterns reported by survivors, and the scientific theories that attempt to explain them. For thousands of years, people from every corner of the world have described remarkably similar experiences after coming close to death. Different languages, different cultures, different beliefs. Yet many stories seem to follow familiar patterns. One of the most common is the sensation of moving through darkness toward a brilliant light. Survivors often describe the light as unlike anything they had ever seen. Not blinding, not painful, but warm, peaceful, and strangely comforting. Others report feeling completely free from fear. Many say that for the first time in their lives, they experienced absolute peace. No anxiety, no pain, no worry about the future. Just an overwhelming feeling of calm. Some describe hearing voices. Others say they sense the presence of loved ones who had already died. These experiences are deeply personal, and they vary from person to person. Some people report seeing familiar faces. Others report only a feeling of not being alone. Because these experiences cannot be independently verified, science cannot conclude whether they reflect events outside the brain or internally generated perceptions. Another frequently reported experience is known as an out-of-body experience. Some survivors say they felt as though they were floating above themselves, looking down, watching doctors perform CPR, seeing medical staff rush around the room. In some cases, people later describe details that matched events that occurred during their resuscitation. These reports have fascinated researchers for decades. Scientists have investigated them carefully, but there is still no widely accepted explanation that accounts for every case. Some studies suggest that the brain can construct a vivid sense of observing oneself from outside the body under certain conditions. Other reported experiences remain difficult to interpret. Then there is perhaps the most emotional account of all. The life review. Imagine reliving. For every mystery, science begins with a question. Not with belief. Not with assumptions. But with evidence. When researchers investigate near-death experiences, they don't ask whether they're supernatural or ordinary. Instead, they ask a simpler question. What is happening inside the brain? One of the leading explanations involves oxygen deprivation. The brain depends on a constant supply of oxygen to function normally. When that supply is interrupted, brain cells begin to struggle. As different regions lose normal function, perception can become distorted. Vision may narrow. Sounds may become distant. The brain may begin creating vivid internal experiences as it tries to make sense of failing sensory input. Some scientists believe this could help explain reports of tunnels, lights, or altered awareness. Another theory focuses on the chemicals released during extreme stress. The human brain communicates using powerful chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. During a life-threatening emergency, these systems can change dramatically. Researchers are studying whether sudden changes in brain chemistry might contribute to vivid perceptions, emotional intensity, or unusual memories. There is also evidence that dreams can feel incredibly real. Most of us have experienced waking from a dream that seemed to last hours, only to discover that only a few minutes had passed. Time inside the brain doesn't always match time measured by a clock. Some neuroscientists wonder whether the extraordinary experiences reported during cardiac arrest could involve similar distortions of time and perception. Another possibility involves memory itself. Human memory is remarkably powerful. But it isn't perfect. Every memory we recall is reconstructed by the brain. Details may be strengthened. Others may fade. New information can become woven into older memories without us realizing it. This doesn't mean survivors are being dishonest. It simply